her child sins. We did a study last year to try to identify the extent of the problem. We ran out of time because of all the cases we found. We did a snippet. We found 50 cases in 23 states. We created a report based on that called Sharia in American Courts. It's available at shariainamericancourts.com. And we detailed 50 cases in 23 states where Sharia has been invoked. The expertise used to research these cases was pathetic. It was me. We actually have legal scholars now expanding this report, actual trained individuals in law and things like that. And we have found very quickly, through more sophisticated techniques of research this year, dozens of more cases in which Sharia was invoked, and we are in the process of updating that report, thanks to that work. So keep an eye on that page. You're going to find out that 50 cases in 23 states is going to turn into hundreds of cases in more states than 23. I can't give you a figure because there are some states where we know for a fact there's never been any infiltration of Sharia at all in the court systems, but there will be more states than 23. So this is a real threat. This is happening. It's been happening for years. I think we found 3 cases in Virginia already in our research. So American Laws for American Courts is designed to prevent the infiltration of Sharia into the state court system, whether it be in Virginia, or Tennessee, or Louisiana, or Arizona, or Kansas. We were pleased that at the Republican National Convention in Tampa, the Republican Party adopted the language of American Laws for American Courts as part of the party platform. It is in the National Republican Party platform, which we hope will help us in 2013 to pass more American Laws for American Courts bills in various states around the country. Here in Virginia, we're hopeful to find some good sponsors of American Laws for American Courts legislation. I think you call them patrons here in Virginia, actually. We're at work in Virginia, but we need help. For anybody in the audience who might be interested in helping with that effort, please let us know. That's the story on American Laws for American Courts, which is essentially the flagship anti-Sharia legislation. But I'm going to move on to some other forms of legislation at this point as well, because, as you know, Sharia is an all-encompassing code of life, and American Laws for American Courts is designed to protect our legal system from the infiltration of Sharia. But Sharia covers what I say to you when you sneeze. And if you sneeze the second time, you can find something in Sharia textbooks that tells me what I'm supposed to say when you sneeze the second time. And it's different from what I'm supposed to say to you the first time. That's on the lower end of the spectrum. Go to the upper end of the spectrum, Sharia dictates the situation under which an Islamic state would go to war. So imagine how broad the spectrum is for Sharia law. Everything from what I say to you when you sneeze to when we're going to war and why and against who. You can't knock that down with one piece of legislation. So this is going to be a multi-year, multifaceted process. One piece of legislation that we've worked on that is passed into law in New York, in California, Florida, Illinois, Louisiana, Tennessee, and Utah is the Free Speech Defense Act. This is very timely at this point because of what is going on in the world right now. You wouldn't think that we would have to defend our First Amendment within our own borders, but the fact is that we do. The Free Speech Defense Act had its genesis from an important court case. It was originally known as Rachel's Law, we don't call it Rachel's Law anymore because there was also another Rachel's Law having to do with the Witness Protection Program or something like that, and that causes confusion. But the Free Speech Defense Act was concocted because of a brave woman named Rachel Ehrenfeld, who is the chair of the Economic Warfare Institute. In 2002, she wrote a book, which you can buy off of Amazon still, called Funding Evil. It's all about how jihadists raise money. It's an outstanding book. Very easy to read, covers a lot of things. In that book, Rachel Ehrenfeld, God bless you, Rachel Ehrenfeld pointed out that according to the U.S. Treasury Department, Islamic charities commonly fund jihadist groups. And I mean, we could talk for 45 minutes about how that works. Not going to, but she was right about that. She also pointed out that one of the biggest charities that was involved in this activity was largely funded by a Saudi prince, who I'm glad to say has assumed room temperature since this episode, but this Prince Mahfouz was a guy that she pointed out. He gives a lot of money to this charity. U.S. Treasury Department says this charity gives money to Al-Qaeda. The book Funding Evil was meant to be published and sold in America. However, 23 copies were sold over Amazon.com into the United Kingdom. That's significant, believe it or not, because the prince sued Rachel Ehrenfeld. But he didn't sue her in the United States. He sued her in the United Kingdom. Why do you suppose that is? Because they turned the libel and slander laws on their head. Are there any lawyers in the room? There never are. So I can say this without fear of successful contradiction. No, really. In America, if I write something bad about you, and you sue me, you have to prove two things. Number one, that what I wrote was not true. And number two, that I had malice when I wrote it. Okay? In Great Britain and in many other countries around the world, if I write something bad about you and you sue me, I have to prove, the burden of proof is on me, I have to prove that what I wrote is true. Now, put that in the context of a book about terrorism financing. She could have been dragged into court and have to reveal sources for much of her work to a guy who was funding Al-Qaeda. Connect the dots. People could lose their lives. Rachel Ehrenfeld is not a wealthy woman. Her U.S. counsel advised her not to go to Great Britain to defend herself. So therefore, the prince got a default judgment of like $256,000, which is like the change he leaves in his sofa cushion. But to her, might as well be all the money in the world. He got a default judgment on that. So his next step was he's going to come to courts in the United States to have that verdict adjudicated and to have his award adjudicated in our court systems. Because that is commonly done, believe it or not, in our court systems. There'll be foreign laws that sometimes have to come over here, and for various reasons, the U.S. court system has to figure them out, and very often award damages in cases like this. Well, a movement was started called Rachel's Law, now called the Freedom of Speech Defense Act, where these states have passed laws that say no court in this state shall award a judgment from a foreign jurisdiction in a libel case if that foreign jurisdiction did not afford both of the parties the same rights as the U.S. First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. In other words, we're not going to award verdicts when the burden of proof is on the writer, because that is a huge imposition of freedom of expression. Now, we have a different view. If we fast forward to nowadays, and we're talking about slandering the prophet. And when we think of slander and libel, we think of one thing. But if you actually look in the Sharia law textbooks, their definition is different from ours. Under Sharia, slander is when you say anything that might prove offensive to somebody. It's there in black and white. Slander is anything that might offend somebody. So when they talk about the Organization of the Islamic Conference, or that they call it the Organization of Islamic Cooperation now, when they talk